Hi everyone, this is Sharful from Codebox Automation Lab. So I'm going to start a new tutorial series which is JavaScript. You must have heard JavaScript if you're familiar with the programming world. If you see the Google, YouTube and other big websites, they're all they're built on JavaScript. Nowadays JavaScript one of the most famous and popular programming languages in the web application world. So let's start our journey. So let's see first, before we start JavaScript, what is our agenda. We're going to have some introduction about the JavaScript. Let's see the agenda. So our agenda would be introduction of web application, client and web services, or client and web servers, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and finally more details about what is JavaScript and so on. So first is web application. What is web application? We all know the web application simply like any application that's displayed on through the browser, which is a web application. But if we just think about theoretically, a web application is a computer program that utilizes web browsers and web technology to perform tasks over the internet as per client's request. It means it is a web application. We know this web application is a web application that's displayed through the web browser like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, all those browser. Behind the scene there is some technology involved with this, and it's a display that some data through the internet as per client. It means when a user they send some request through their browser to visit any application, to do anything at any application, and when the return comes from the server side and it's a display through the browser, it's called a web application. You can call that a web application. Say example, Amazon is a web application, right? Some e-commerce site, some online banking like a TD Bank, right? Those are all our web application. And a web application also called client server computer programming is one of the key words they use for a web application, the technology that works, which is a client server computer programming. What does it mean, client server computer programming? When a website we build, when a developer they build a website, they need to host that website somewhere as a server machine. It should be hosted somewhere. It should be installed somewhere. So the machine it's get installed. It's called server side. It's a server machine. And from the machine, as a user, they request anything to that specific application. That's a client side. That's a client machine. So a complete web application will be based on client server computer programming. So for doing this request from the client, and its request goes to the server, and server send the data as per the client's request through HTTP protocol or internet protocol, and our browser it's interpret that data as our user understandable language. So for doing all these activities, there is some technology, whatever the technology, that language it works, all together is called client server computer program, which is the the best based of the web application. Okay, so here is one example over here. So how it's really the web application works. So you assume that there's an Amazon website. So what does they do? They install that site, they build the site, and then they install the site on a server machine. They install it, they host it from where it will be run, and there will be database where through some database language it will store the data. So over here in in a server, it will be hosted, the server machine, it will host the application, and database will store the data for that application. And those are the user, like in client, like the user, like from any machine, Mac, your Windows machine, your PC, or your phone, when you all are end user, which is called client. So when client send any request, for Amazon to search any the product on the Amazon website, what's really happen, it goes through this request goes through the internet, which is the HTTP protocol, through this, and it hits the server. And at the server, from the server, it checked also the its server check the data from the database, and it's return the data like response through the internet, again HTTP protocol using, and it's get back to the the client machine. So when it comes to the client machine, the client machines, we use some browser to send our request, like Internet Explorer, it could be Chrome, it could be Firefox, whatever the browser. Those browser have some technology, have some built through some technology, built through some language. What they can do, they can interpret all the data, the response data, as our understandable language, and it's display into the browser, right? And we can see the response. So that's what it's really happen, and so when an end user send any when an end user send any request through any device, that's called client machine. And when the request goes to the server, the machine is hosted the application, that's called the server machine. Okay, so in a server machine, when they build the application, they need to build their business logic, right? They not only build the website, definitely the website, it runs through some business logic. So they build the business logic through some common language. So those are the like a Java, Python, C#, as well as like some database language, say Oracle, could be MSQL. Those are our server-side programs. So server-side programming language are all those are programming languages to help to build their applications business logic. And on the server, on the client side, like for the browser, the browser built on some front end for some client language, which is called HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Here is the JavaScript come to the picture on client side, and all those languages, it's help you to interpret the data is that or response comes from the server, as well as it's give you some interactive nice outlook that we see usually when you visit any web application. Okay, so here is the part is JavaScript is the client side programming language. So now we'll see more details about JavaScript. So before we go to the JavaScript, since JavaScript works with other client-side language, which is HTML, CSS. So let's see this. What is HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It is a hypertext markup language. It describes the structure of a web page. It is used for displaying the web element. So you can see the HTML, you can see it's a skeleton of your of your web element, of your web page, of your web structure. It is the pure structure format. It shows the pure structure or web element through this language. So it describes all of the different web element. Example, your button, your input field, your input text, all those are some form. All those are built by the HTML. So HTML is a skeleton of your web page or web application, which is display your actual web element. Then CSS. So CSS stands for cascading style sheets. Is used to format the layout of a web page. With CSS, you can control the color, font, the size of your text, the space between elements, how elements are positioned and laid out, the background images, background colors are to be used, responsive screen size, and much more. You can see the CSS bring up the color in your skeleton, in your HTML website. So whatever the front you are going to use, how it's going to be color, what is going to be your background color, what is going to be your image color, all those things it's possible done by HTML. So HTML, it gives better look, it gives colorful look on your skeleton or on your web application. Next, JavaScript. So JavaScript, which puts life into a web pages, it will add dynamic nature to the application. So JavaScript brings the dynamic behavior to your application. Up until before JavaScript, your application based on HTML CSS, which is very static application. So it has some web element and it has some colorful view. But it's very static web application. It's not doing any dynamic activities. So JavaScript can bring some dynamic nature to your application. Let's see more about the JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? So JavaScript is a high-level interpreted programming language, was invented by a person named is Brendan Eich in 1995. So it is interpreted and executed on the client machine within HTML. So as I said, as we know, the JavaScript is a client-side high-level language, and it's hosted on the top with HTML. Because JavaScript cannot do anything by alone. It's bring the dynamic behavior to your HTML website, to your HTML language. So it is hosted within HTML. Okay, and then it can reduce the load on server for a specific operation. So JavaScript, since it's itself a language, so it can build a lot of logic, its own logic. Like you can apply some conditional logic, some loops, right? All those things. So and those things does every specific job. So in your JavaScript language, you can create some your own function and do some logical stuffs to do, and those things can apply on your web application. That so when you do something related with those specific business logic, your request don't need to go to the server. So it can happen, it can do that particular operation by itself, the JavaScript, because you can write those logic inside the JavaScript language. So as a result, it's help you to reduce the pressure, reduce the load on your server. So your system, so your application can be executed much faster, can display much faster. It doesn't need to go to your server each and every request. So that JavaScript, it's really help you to execute your system faster. It is a case sensitive. Case sensitive, it means whenever we write the JavaScript code, whatever the name you are using, you have to make sure if you reuse the same name, you have to use exactly the same word you give. So example, you give a variable name, say var. So if you use v is uppercase, whenever you are going to use the same variable to somewhere else, it's for the same class, you definitely have to use the same v as an uppercase, because it is a case sensitive, like other language like Java. Finally, it makes interactive dynamic look to our site. As I said, JavaScript brings the dynamic behavior to the HTML HTML web application, on your HTML application, right? So let's see some use cases of JavaScript. So showing or hidden element. So element, you create an element, it means web element. You can, like, it could be button, it could be any link. So all of your web element will be able to build by HTML. But if you want to hide that element or showing that element active or deactive, those behavior can possible by JavaScript. Adding hover effect. So we all know that when you hover your mouse some of the web element, it does something. It may be pop up some of the messages, it may be show some display another button or anything. So those are called hover effect. How those effect can happen, it's only possible by JavaScript. Similarly, we all used to doing zoom in and zoom out to an image. How does the operation happen in a web application, which is possible through the JavaScript. Similarly, playing audio video on a web page or adding some animation effect, all those things it's possible by JavaScript. So you can see this, those are nowadays there is no web application will be without those kind of effect. Those are very common behavior across any web application, like here hiding the elements, use some hover effect, zoom in and zoom out, playing some audio video, adding some animation. Those really brings dynamic behavior, dynamic activities to your application. So it makes live your application. So JavaScript is the really lifesaver of your application. Without a JavaScript, your application will be very static. If you need to bring some dynamic data, that's JavaScript can help you to do this. Okay, so that's all about the JavaScript. I mean, in a short description, that's what we can tell about. In a nutshell, let's see overall what we have understand about the JavaScript. So in a real life, say assume that this is your client computer, right? See, so it could be your laptop, your PC, your mobile, anything, right? And this is your HTTP or internet. This is the internet, or you can say HTTP protocol, right? And then here is a server where the application installed or host. So this is your server. Nowadays you heard the cloud serving, right? So it's like Amazon, they have a AWS server, there's a Google, they have a data server. So those are any one of the server. It could be physically in your office, it could be physically in your home, or it could be any of the cloud server. So where you can install your or host your application, right? And from here, so when a client send any request, it goes to the server and it's talked with the server through the internet or HTTP protocol. And the server, after they receive your request, client request, and then the response as per your request, and they response through the internet again, right? And it will hit to your browser. So our browser, it has its own mechanism. Every browser like Chrome, Firefox, every browser, they have own mechanism. One of the technology or mechanism they have, they can understand your server response and they can interrupt. They convert those response in a understandable language, like user understandable language. It could be the English language or whatever the language they build the application, right? And then they display on your browser through the browser, right? So when it display the browser, we see the website. So the website, it is built, the displaying website through the browser, it is built basically in a few languages, which is HTML, right? And another one CSS, as we have just gone through the little bit description. Another one JavaScript. So here is the JavaScript come to the picture. And so HTML, we know this HTML, it's a pure skeleton of your websites that build all of your web element, and CSS bring the color to your HTML, right? And now where this JS comes from. So JS, as I said, is bring dynamic behavior to your HTML. So it needs to work. This needs to work with your HTML very tightly. So where this usually HTML is a separate file, your CSS could be separate file too, and your JavaScript, since it needs to work tightly with your HTML, so it needs to host within a HTML. So in HTML, so your HTML is here and your JavaScript will be on the top, so your JS would be on the top, right? So that it can, so whatever your JS language, it will apply to your HTML to bring live, to make a dynamic your application. Okay, so that's all you can understand in a short description, how the HTML works, what is HTML. Even nowadays, JavaScript is not only this a client side, it is also backend side too. It does some backend job through the Node.js framework. So that's a different topic, but overall that's pretty much we need to know. The JavaScript is a client side high level language that hosts within HTML, and it brings the dynamic behavior or nature to your HTML application. Okay, so that's all for about the introduction part about the JavaScript, and we'll go more in details in our upcoming lecture, where we'll start from the scratch, like the variable, some language, some logical steps in JavaScript, and we'll learn all the very basic steps related to JavaScript, as much as you need in terms of like automation world. Okay, thanks a lot, stay tuned, and see you in the next tutorial. Have a good one.